Good afternoon. Welcome to the February 2025 Bio Coffee Chat on elevating the patient perspective in the CMS drug price negotiation program. I'm so excited to be joined by an amazing panel of leaders from the patient community today who have engaged with CMS as well as with various other decision makers over time to ensure that patient perspectives are appropriately incorporated in decision making. And this is such a timely discussion. As many of you are aware, for the 2025 round of drug price negotiations that was kicked off in January, we have data submissions that are due in just a few days in March. And so I know that many patient communities are actively trying to figure out how to be most helpful in these negotiations or in these discussions. And so I'm just really excited to be here today with this amazing panel of experts. With me today is Sean Chang, who's the Director of Policy at the National Health Council, Stuart Perry, who is, among many other things, the board chair of the Diabetes Leadership Council, Kristen Sloan, who is the Managing Director of Public Policy at ACS CAN, and Tiffany Westridge Robertson, who is the Chief Executive Officer of AI Arthritis. I will let the panelists introduce themselves and their organizations here in a second because they will do a much better job than I can. But to start us off, I would love for each of you, my panelists, if you could briefly talk about what your organization's mission is and why your organization is engaging in helping your patient communities engage in the drug price negotiations with CMS. And Kristen, I see you first on my on my Zoom screen. Would you mind going first?
Sure, I'm happy to. Thank you, Karen. I'm Kirsten Sloan. I'm with the American Cancer Society's Cancer Action Network, or ACS CAN. And we're thrilled to be part of this conversation today because I think it's really important for patients to engage in the Medicare negotiation program. We're doing so for two key reasons. One is affordability is a very critical issue for cancer patients. We have wonderful new, amazing cancer medications that are coming to market and on the market, but in order for cancer patients to take advantage of those, they have to be able to afford them. And the second reason that we're engaging in this conversation with CMS is that we also want to make sure that beneficiaries have access to those medications. So affordability and accessibility are very important. And from the accessibility standpoint, making sure that innovation is allowed to continue and isn't hindered in any way.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Stuart, I see you next. I know you've been such an amazing leader in the diabetes community for so many years. If you wouldn't mind briefly introducing yourself, the organization that you represent, and again, why do you engage on this topic?
Thank you, Doctor. My name is Stuart Perry. I have been a volunteer in the diabetes space for over 35 years. I'm an insurance agent by profession. I have type 2 diabetes, and my family has been hit hard by both type 1 and type 2 diabetes. I am the chair of the board of the Diabetes Leadership Council, and I serve on the board of the Diabetes Patient Advocacy Coalition, which is our brother or sister organization. We're nonprofits, as the name might tell you. We focus on policy and advocacy on behalf of patients with diabetes. We believe that what gets lost, particularly inside the Beltway in DC, is the patient voice. And the patient voice is critical and necessary when we start talking about how people are treated, how their access to their medications and therapies that they need to handle their chronic disease. So we're involved because of the patient, because we stand up for people who won't or can't stand up for themselves and their families. And that's what we do. That's why we do what we do. We're involved in this particular issue because it's the right thing to do. And we always fall back on that thing. What is the right thing to do for patients? And that's where we're going to step into the void. So, doctor, if that's what you needed from me, I'll hush at that point.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Tiffany, I see you next. And I know that you have been such a leader for the arthritis community. If you wouldn't mind briefly introducing your organization, the coalitions that you're leading, and kind of why you're here.
Sure. Thank you. So my name is Tiffany Westridge Robertson. I am original founder, CEO of AI Arthritis, which is short for International Foundation Autoimmune, Autoinflammatory Arthritis. We're the only organization that narrows down the 24 diseases that are autoimmune, autoinflammatory that include arthritis. So that brings it down to a very narrow amount in conjunction to over 100 diseases that was patient ideated. I myself live with non-radiographic axial spondyloarthritis. And excuse me, and our mission is as patients to identify missing gaps, unmet needs, look around to our global network of collaborators, see who's doing what, don't duplicate efforts, instead join collaborations with the idea that what patients are saying is what needs to drive the change. So everything we do is ideated by patient voices and peer-led guidance and materials that were driven by patients with others as our advisors. In saying that, we became involved because our mission is about the patient voice, and we became involved in both PDABs and CMS at the end of 2023. And it was at that time we realized there's also this new era of patient engagement, as I call it, where patient organizations are sort of struggling to see where we have a seat at the table, and then also a new call for more patient voices than ever before, where they're saying the real patient, we're saying more than the traditional 5%. So at that time, we decided it was necessary to form a coalition that would cover the government drug affordability reviews, both CMS IRA and also the PDABs. It's a two-part coalition called Ensuring Access Through Collaborative Health, or EACH, which is the patient organization and allied group side, and then the Coordinating Patient Inclusion Council, which is a coalition for patients and caregivers who are dealing with any of these government drug affordability reviews. And we also make sure the patient organization doesn't lose a voice at the table. Our organization last year, before forming the coalition, we were responsible of the 2 of 10 drugs that were in our space. We recruited 40% of all of the respondents, and of those 40% had never spoken publicly before. So we are taking that model of our peer-to-peer recruitment and peer-led education into the Patient Inclusion Council, and encourage any organization who is participating, please consider joining the coalition, and most importantly, getting your patient community part of the pick. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I know there's a lot to unpack there, but Sean, would you mind introducing yourself and NHC quickly? I know NHC has done a ton of work over the last 2 years or so with CMS, in particular on the drug price negotiation program. Would you briefly mind introducing yourself and NHC?
Great. Thank you, Karen, and thanks to Bio for hosting this really important discussion. I'm Sean Shea. I'm the Director of Policy at the National Health Council. The NHC was created by and for patient organizations over 100 years ago to bring together a diverse group of patients, providers, researchers, and industry partners to advance patient-centered health policy. Today, we have over 170 member organizations, and we work to increase access to affordable, equitable, and sustainable healthcare while forging consensus on key health issues. So at the NHC, we believe that any policy affecting patient access to treatment has to be shaped by the people that it impacts the most, so patients themselves. And we've been deeply engaged with CMS's drug price negotiation process under the IRA. And while we've seen efforts to include patient perspectives, there remain some challenges ensuring that engagement is meaningful and not just a procedural step. So our goal is to help patient organizations navigate the process, prepare effective submissions, and advocate for policies that balance affordability with continued innovation. So last year, we worked closely with patient organizations and CMS to ensure patient voices were heard. We're continuing that effort today, and looking forward to the conversation. And ultimately, this isn't about negotiating numbers, right? It's about preserving access to life-saving and life-improving treatments for the people who need them most. And thanks for having me.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much for being here. This will be a really rich conversation. And for everybody who's on the call today, we will make sure that we have a lot of time for discussion for additional voices. So as we go along with the conversation today, please get your questions ready. And also, if you have your own experiences with CMS, if you have resources to share, just know that we really want to have time at the end of our hour together to do that. To start and level set, Sean, would you mind giving us the 50,000-foot overview of what is the drug price negotiation program in a nutshell? What are these patient engagement opportunities that we are talking about today? And what is that magical, March 1st date, where the first type of engagement is due?
Sure, absolutely. So the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, was a landmark law passed in 2022 that for the first time gave Medicare the authority to negotiate the prices of a certain high-cost prescription drugs. So that process, they started with 10 drugs for the first round of negotiations in 2024. Those drugs were among the highest spending Medicare Part D drugs, meaning that they cost the program beneficiaries the most. And CMS used financial criteria looking at total Medicare spending, availability of generics, and clinical and benefits. So they've created three primary ways for patients and caregivers to participate. One of those is submitting written data to CMS, and that deadline is, as you mentioned, is the March 1st, so coming up very quickly. So this is one of the only guaranteed ways for patient organizations to really shape the negotiation process. That information collection request, or ICR, is CMS's formal mechanism for gathering patient and caregiver perspectives on issues such as how a drug impacts daily life, the burden of side effects and administration, barriers to access and affordability. The challenge is that process is a bit complex, and many of the groups that we worked with found last year's ICR difficult to navigate. So we're looking forward to the conversation here. And there are a couple of other ways to engage, is participating in patient roundtables. So these are closed door sessions that allow patients and patient organizations to speak directly with CMS staff. The goal there is to provide candid and unfiltered feedback on the impact of drug pricing and access policies. Those sessions are more limited in scope, so only a select number of patient voices are usually included. And the third opportunity is engaging in clinician town halls. So that's new for this year. Those town halls focus on clinical perspectives, including how drugs compare in terms of safety, effectiveness, and patient-reported outcomes. So those are those three opportunities.
Thank you so much. Tiffany, I saw that you put a couple of links in the chat, and I know you and many of the patients in your community engaged quite extensively in the listening sessions last year. Based on that experience, how do you prepare for this year? How do you work with your community? And I know because you have so much experience, you're actively trying to help other communities too that are new to the process.
Absolutely. So all of the work that AR Arthritis is doing individually this year is directly routed through the coalition. So the coalition is disease agnostic. So we are a participant in the coalition. And in saying that, it'll be primarily we have two sides of this coalition. So in preparing the patient organizations in particular, I've gone through my background. I have background in research, patient research partner, survey design, questions analysis, coding. That's all in my wheelhouse. So I've spent a considerable amount of time going through the ICR and trying to figure out how we can facilitate help for patient organizations as well as patients to be able to complete it. So that's the first thing, is we do have two different stakeholder groups that both will provide different information. One of the things to point out that the form itself says patient organizations and patients and caregivers all in one area, but in reality, only patients can really fill out a good portion of those. And the question 41 is really only the one that patient organizations can fill out. I think part of the impact or the what we said last year in the comments may have been taken too literally, in that we asked that patient organizations be allowed to speak on behalf of patients for when they are not comfortable speaking in the focus groups or in the roundtables or the town hall. But when you look at the questions, it sort of took that too far in saying the questions are, tell us your experience with this drug. Tell us why you stopped taking this drug. As a patient organization, unless I'm talking directly to this patient and gathering it, that's the only way I could facilitate that. So I think that we just have to have a balance, and we're going to do that through the Patient Inclusion Council. So what we did in last year, and we're going to replicate and invite anybody, any organization, to please collaborate on this. We don't want to duplicate efforts. We want to send people to what you're also doing, but where our secret sauce is and what we know works is this patient-led preparation, not training. We do open discussion groups where patients are invited to share their stories and their information. Then we help them by craft how that ties in to the questions that are asking at CMS. So in saying that, if they're not comfortable doing the focus groups, if they're not comfortable doing the town halls, which this year it is a two-way dialogue. That's new. Last year we spoke to nobody. And so that's an improvement. But this is an opportunity for patient voices to have more participation. So we as patient organizations will be able to capture their information and submit it as a group and an extension per disease, et cetera, in addition to the survey, the online form, which is very difficult to still this year to navigate, even though you can save your responses. That's nice. And also for patient organizations, the directions say, start at the patient portion. But in reality, when I looked through this, I think we should be starting at question 29, which is under the manufacturers. There's a lot of great information we can give on therapeutic alternatives, using that loosely. And also that's where all the data is asked for in regards to how the efficacy with patients. I know a lot of us have that information. So I strongly encourage both stakeholder groups. We need to think of both of our participations and look at that form when it comes to starting at question 29.
So listening to you and looking at the chat and all the questions that are coming up, I know that the ICR, this information collection request, this form is difficult to navigate. You talked about question 29, question 42, patient groups who want to participate and who want to share their story through this data collection form. Where can they turn for help? Do you have any practical advice?
So we are actually, as the coalition, one of our responsibilities is to help patient organizations in addition to patients navigate the space. So we are going to be putting something out tomorrow on a little bit more guidance on kind of how I've combed through this in particular, and talking to some other patient groups with some guidance on how to complete the other areas. So with some bullet points on, for example, therapeutic alternatives, what types of things could go under there. So some kind of guidance, because if you do look at the CMS directions and you've never done this before in particular, or you're just going by their directions, it's going to say, go, your patient organization, go here. And we're going to miss the opportunity. So we as an organization will be putting out some guidance on that. And it is sent out to people who sign up for the coalition. So it's not things we have been publishing on our website. It's for our community. We also have a Slack community with a channel for CMS IRA and all the PDABs. And we brainstorm and collaborate in there as well. So then we'll post it in there. And people who are part of the coalition also can brainstorm and talk. So that's how we aim to hopefully help the patient organizations navigate this.
And again, we'll open it up for people from the audience in a couple of minutes, but if you have if you're on the webinar and if you have resources that you want to share with the community, please put them in the chat. And Sean, I saw that you shared the NHC link. I know you all at NHC are doing a lot to help patient groups navigate this process. I think it's really important. It's very clear how important it is. I think looking at last year's process, it became very clear how much of an impact the patient perspective provided in the process, but it's not an easy process to navigate. Is that kind of a fair summary? So, Stuart, I know you are spending a lot of time both as a patient and through your long leadership in the diabetes community, helping patients tell their story. What are some of, apologies, what are some of the things that you wish CMS knew about diabetes care, about living with diabetes, and what are maybe some of the misunderstandings and misconceptions? And how do you work with other advocates in your community to help get that message out?
Thank you, Karen. That's a pretty loaded question. I can take the rest of the hour to answer it if you'd like for me to. I will tell you that diabetes is a disease that treats everybody different. Type 1, for example, has a completely different therapy profile than type 2. But yet type 2 is what is the cost driver in Medicare, Medicaid, and in many state and federal budgets. So regulators and elected officials tend to be focused on cost. And that's tend to be where patients are focused because medications are costly and diabetes medications especially. Now we have gotten the price of insulin down, particularly in Medicare, but that's not the way it always is in private insurance. So there's a big learning curve, as Tiffany said so well, about individual patients getting lost in the process and individual patients finding it difficult to overcome the barriers put in front of them by regulators and by organizations like CMS. So we're trying to educate our patients and be the leader for them in driving a lot of this information that we believe regulators and policymakers need in order to make fair decisions. When we start talking about drug negotiations, okay, we're concerned about who gets the benefit of that. Do the patients get the benefit? Normally, patients get left out in the cold when it comes to health plan designs, when it comes to our pocketbooks at the pharmacy counter. We're left out in the cold. That can't be. People have to have access to their medications in an affordable way, or they tend not to take them or ration them. And we know that that is not in the best interest of the patient. So we work a lot on education. One side of our organization does policy. The other side actually does individual advocacy. So we're splitting that, we're threading that needle to make sure that the policy is interpreted correctly for the benefit of the patients. There are the weight loss drugs are a perfect example. All anybody cares about is cost. Well, what about the effect? The problem with diabetes and weight loss is your costs are up front. Unless it's untreated, then the costs become at the rear with all the complications. Our country does not put prevention on complications or diseases at the forefront. We treat symptoms. And as long as we continue to put profits in front of patients, we're going to have the problem we have right now. So what do? I beat a lot of soapboxes. I stand on a lot of soapboxes, drop a lot of mics, and sometimes make people uncomfortable because you've got so many organizations in between the patient, their doctor, and their care. That has to stop. PBMs, health insurance companies, all these now CMS, Medicare, the Medicaid, it's all got to go down to the patient. And Tiffany, I heard you say that about, you're right in the middle of my screen, by the way, Tiffany, and I heard you say that 3 or 4 times, and it's all about the patient. So if you're asking me what we're doing, we're putting the patient first when it comes to diabetes. Now, I'm not an expert as Christian is in cancer. I am I do know diabetes. I've had it for over 35 years. It cost me many members of my family. So I feel like I'm an expert, even though I am not medically trained. We work with Sean and the NHC on making sure that all the groups, I was just at their annual meeting, and all the groups talked about the same concerns. So there is power in numbers, but there's also power in what Tiffany was talking about, which is navigating through the eye of the needle that government entities tend to put out there, that in my opinion is a detriment, not an asset, to patients when it goes out there. So I don't know if that was what you wanted me to talk about, but Karen, I think you know me well enough. I can talk about most anything out there, including horses, if you'd like to talk about that.
Very much appreciated. And we will definitely have the pause talk afterwards. That couldn't agree more with everything that's been said already. And I think it really emphasizes just how important it is for patients to be engaged in the negotiations, to tell their story, despite the logistical challenges with navigating data forms, etc. And I'm just so thrilled that there are organizations like yours out there that are really helping patients and patient groups that are new navigate this really important process. Kristen, from the ACS CAN perspective, I would love your thoughts, on in addition to everything that we've already heard, what are some other reasons why patient groups should engage in the negotiation, have their voices heard? And then with ACS CAN really representing the whole cancer community, so many different types of cancer, how do you think about that? And how do you work with so many different cancer communities that all have their own stories?
Certainly. So, in answer to your first question, why patients should engage, I mean, there are so many reasons, but the top 3 for us are that we want to make sure that CMS understands what the actual patient experience is with these drugs. There are 4 cancer drugs on the list this time. So needing to make sure that they fully understand what the patient experiences when they take a drug. How does it interact with their daily life? How does it manage their symptoms? What does it mean to have that drug available to them? And potentially, what could it mean if that drug was no longer available to them or was made expensive because of formulary placement and limited their access? So that's number 1. Number 2 is CMS also needs to hear from patients about the impact of these decisions on insurers. There's a lot of mischief going on right now among insurers and health plans in terms of where they put drugs on the formulary and how they steer patients towards or away from specific drugs. And I was really pleased that after last year's guidance, the proposed guidance came out, CMS acknowledged that this is an issue and that that's something that they would be monitoring. They heard beneficiaries. And so I think that was evidence that they're listening to what the community is saying. And finally, I think they really need to understand, CMS needs to understand from patients what the impact is on innovation and the fact that we need drugs in the pipeline, how many are there, what the impact of negotiation will be on that in the future. And then I'm sorry, Karen, your second question was, what are we doing?
I think you already addressed, but how do you
Okay.
work with such diverse communities with so many different cancers, so many different cancer drugs?
Yep. And the one final note that I would make is I absolutely agree with Sean and Tiffany that the ICR process is very complicated. And it's also limiting because you're going into a portal and you're trying to answer specific questions. And Tiffany was right in saying that they direct patients to a certain number of questions. So one of the things that we're doing is we are writing a comprehensive letter about all of the issues that we think need to be addressed. We're going to pop that into the portal, but we're also going to send it to CMS. Whereas we're not providing right now actual patient stories. We're in the process of doing a survey of cancer patients that we'll share later at one of the patient meetings. But in the meantime, there are issues like therapeutic alternative and formulary placement and innovation that we want to remind CMS of. So we're going to drop those into the portals and then send it as a letter.
Fantastic. And I think you brought up a really important point. Sean, I know you have had you and NHC and the patient community with you have had many interactions with CMS. The formal listening sessions, roundtables, ICR processes are part of that. But Kristen, what I think I heard you say is there are other opportunities. You can write letters. There are other ways to get your voice heard. So I would love your thoughts, Sean, from you and then from anybody else on the panel. Sean, I think you might be on mute.
Yeah, so beyond the formal channels like public listening sessions and the ICR process, so direct stakeholder meetings with CMS officials is something that the NHC would have done in previous years. There's been some difficulty in getting that arranged, right? But that I think in previous meetings with NHC members, I've always kind of highlighted the need to maintain those relationships with agencies beyond kind of formal comment writing processes and things like that, so that you can establish that relationship and request those targeted discussions with policymakers on specific concerns, whether it's formulary impact, patient burdens, gaps in engagement processes. There are also, opportunities to request small group briefings with CMS as well. It depends on the kind of specific outcome that you're looking for. I think when it comes to this specific, the drug negotiation process, they have their team and, I think most folks have their contact information. I don't believe that the staff contact information has changed yet. When I find that, I'll pop that into the chat.
Fantastic. And I think you all have mentioned just the various ways in which the negotiation process is impacting patients. Kristen, you talked about formulary placement, you talked about non-medical switching, you talked about access, you talked about innovation. I know there's so much to unpack there. I know one of the things that I've heard a lot of concern about is around therapeutic alternatives. And I know last year we heard a lot, and I know, Tiffany, you and patients in your community in particular have been quite vocal on this, that in theory things might be therapeutic alternatives, but non-medical switching, being forced to switch from one therapy to another, can have tremendous negative impacts. It's not as easy as just exchanging one widget to another. So I would love from you and from actually everybody else on the panel, your thoughts on like how do you help CMS understand or get their arms around therapeutic alternatives? What really is an alternative for an individual patient, and how should that be incorporated? How do you tell that story?
Yes, we have the coalition in particular. We have sent letter after letter after letter. And as I said, AR arthritis, our efforts, we typically participate as under the coalition and break off with those points. And saying that, I literally just messaged our legislative policy director, Mark, who's on here. Hey, Mark. And I this morning, because I was working on the ICR, and I said, is there any way, like this might be a dumb question, but is there any way we can change the name of therapeutic alternatives? Because the name inherently, it just says non-medical switching is okay. Because there is no alternative. When a drug works for you, it works. And there's been a lot of controversy that's come up with this. CMS, PDABs, they are different, but in many respects they are one and the same in that they're government drug affordability reviews. And I just wanted to point out something that they do reference each other. And there was something that came up, particularly in the PDAB in Maryland, where there was so much pushback from patient organizations about using these therapeutic alternatives, same as what we're seeing here for CMS. That's why this is relevant. And they made the staff made an effort to try to tell us that the therapeutic alternative that they're trying in their definition is to understand if there's any drug in the same class, then looking back at what they cost compared to the other, and then questioning the cost comparisons, but not the anything else. I think in retrospect, now it's very clear they said that to appease us, because when I look at the CMS definition, therapeutic alternatives, drugs that are used to treat the same condition or disease state as the selected drug. The IRA directs CMS to consider how the selected drug compares to therapeutic alternatives. It says nothing about cost. So I think that we have to be very unified in the fact that, as Kirsten talked about, precision medicine is here. It's not on the horizon. It's here, and it's here for cancer. It's here for many of our diseases. Our diseases, for the most part, I don't care if it's autoimmune or cancer, diabetes, anyone who's on this call, our diseases for the most part are heterogeneous, right? They're unique for an individual. There are subgroups. And I think we have to find a way to just scream from the mountaintops that this term is compacting us down. It's doing nothing but approving and building on the issue we've been fighting against for decades with insurance companies who think it's okay to just take us off a drug because there's a therapeutic alternative. It's compacting an issue, a systemic issue, essentially. So I know in our letters that we're going to put out, we're going to address this. We have some past letters. I'm happy to reference. You can find them on our website too, under our resources. But this is something I think we can all unite and should unite strong on, and then supplement it with the patient stories as well.
I'm seeing a lot of head nodding. Anybody else wants to talk about this issue?
Well, if I can, Karen, this issue all stems from exclusionary formularies and rebates. It all comes down to those two things. If you got rid of rebates and the exclusionary formularies, then there's not a profit motive to do the step therapy or any of the others that we talked about. So it boils down to money. It boils down to putting profit above patients. And we are allowing insurance companies, and don't get me wrong, I made a living for 50 years as an insurance agent. Okay. So it boils down to insurance companies and PBMs putting profit ahead of patients. And we've got to stop it. And if the government won't stop it, who will? And that's where it boils down to. So Tiffany was exactly spot on, as was Kristen, on everything they said. But it boils down to money. You know, I've got a good friend, George Huntley, who's the CEO of my organization, who says, follow the money. And if you follow the money, you see why decisions are made. And that's where this country has got to get away from. Why do you think drugs cost more here than they do in Canada or Mexico? It's because of the broken system we have of drug delivery and drug pricing. And that's what all these other things are symptoms. As I said earlier when you introduced me, we've got to quit treating symptoms and treat diseases. And all the things we're talking about are symptoms of the disease. And that disease is profit making, profit gouging, profiteering in pharmaceuticals and other parts. And I'll get off my soapbox now, but that's what's going on.
I would add to that. I think it's also important for us as patient advocates to constantly remind CMS and policymakers that the diseases that we represent are not just one disease. So in the case of cancer, we're not talking, cancer isn't one disease, cancer is over 200 diseases. And so when someone finds a treatment that is right for them, it's generally because the other treatments haven't worked. And so sending them back to treatments that don't work is not only a waste of money, but it also endangers outcomes. So I think we have to constantly be this voice, the point that Tiffany made, just constantly reminding policymakers and CMS that there's more to this than meets the eye.
I love that.
Hey,
Go ahead.
no,
Just one.
I was just saying amen. I feel like I was a preacher and listening in church. Amen, Kristen.
Related to that, and Kristen, you had mentioned before the impact on innovation too. I know another thing that I've heard a lot of concern about, in particular recently, is um, how CMS really groups the different indications of a therapy when in their process, and how they consider the fact that, as Tiffany, you said, there are different patient populations and subgroups, and the different reasons for why drugs are used, the different indications, they don't all have the same value. Some might be particularly valuable to patients because they meet a particularly huge unmet need. And I know there's a lot of concern that by grouping it all together and lumping it all together, there's follow-on research and further developing drugs and bringing additional indications to market. Those incentives might be impacted. I was wondering if either of you have any thoughts about this, and really how to talk about the unmet need and the value that the drugs bring to different parts of the population.
Karen, I'm not sure. When you say the unmet need, could you clarify?
So, as many of you know, I come from the rare disease community, and oftentimes we have rare and non-rare uses of drugs, and the degree to which one use of a drug treats an unmet need can be very different from a different use. So oftentimes we have products that are approved for multiple uses, but they're not all necessarily the same.
So
And
are
I
you
know in the oncology space, you might have one product that is approved for to treat multiple different cancers in multiple different age groups.
so are you referring to the orphan drug designation issue?
No, more how CMS considers a drug. The fact that CMS
No,
might
single
even
source.
single source drug. Yes.
Got it. Got it. Okay. So I think there's a lot of misunderstanding around the single source issue. So you've got the way that it's working is a small molecule drug that's been on the market for 9 years and a biologic that's been on the market for 13 years, I believe those are right, are exempt from negotiation. But or that's where you start. Sorry, that's where you start negotiations. So the argument is that because of the differential between those two, in the world of cancer, a lot of cancer patients prefer small molecules because it's an oral therapy as opposed to an infused therapy. And so there's an argument that this differential may push manufacturers to develop more biologics as opposed to small molecules. And so the question is, are you limiting then the access that patients might have to that therapy? I don't know. Tiffany, what do you have to add?
I was half writing messages to PMs on there.
Oh.
So, but from what I heard on that is where we're talking about kind of the infusion, like the different types of medications, right? And how that weighs in. Did I hear that correctly on the question?
How do you capture the value? The fact that different patients might prefer different things, and the fact that policies can that the way things are, that the way policies are currently written aren't necessarily supporting that. And yeah.
Yeah. So, for this round, I think for me, and I'm gonna second what Stuart said about follow the money, because we have to look at where the money's going to happen, or where the dollars, that's what their choices are all going to be around. We're really, in the whole scope of things, in the scheme of things, we're supplemental data. I mean, that's what it is. In saying that, I think any data that any of the organizations have, because data, if we don't have the money and the actual dollars, the next golden standard is the data. So if there's any information, for example, in the autoimmune community, the biologics, which are very expensive drugs, only 40 to 60% of us are ever going to it's going to work on once they get to market. There's a lot of reasons why: heterogeneity, the heterogeneous nature of the disease, not the proper demographics in the clinical trials. There's a lot of reasons, but the real world evidence and the post-market surveillance that we have all collected, if you have that submitted, that's where I go back to the survey form in the questions 29 through where they actually invite us to start. There's places for that. There's places you can upload that data. I think that's really important. I would stay away from preferences, the word preferences, because that's something that is frowned upon. It's not supposed to be about the patient preference. If it's something that's like a contradiction, they have adversary effects to something that's different. But I think that what I know we always try to also go on is just really pushing the point that there is an ethical obligation by the doctor to treat to the individual characteristic of a patient. And when that happens, you have a comorbidity, there's something that doesn't make you the same as everybody who was in that clinical trial, or the data that they're using to justify the effectiveness and safety and cost. At that time, it should default to the ethical obligation of the doctor. I think we really need to harness in on that point and just pull out the data, and anyone who's continuing to do data, keep that in mind. I think that, it may not be something we can use today, but it's something we can use tomorrow.
Couldn't agree more. I would love to open it up to the audience in a second, but Sean, any perspectives? I know NHC has done a ton of work on all of these issues, including the data, including the issue of qualified single source drug, etc. Anything from your perspective to add?
I think, so just to clarify, and I think operating at that kind of mile high level compared to Kirsten and Tiffany's, so CMS defines single source as one that's without a marketed generic or biosimilar, so that's what makes it eligible for price negotiation. And I think we've touched on this. Like, the challenge is that this really broad definition can group drugs with different mechanisms of action or clinical benefits, even if they aren't interchangeable for all patients. So while CMS sees this as a cost-saving measure, it definitely risks oversimplifying treatment decisions and potentially limiting access to medications that patients rely on. So this is why patients really need to participate in this process, because we have this critical role in ensuring that CMS understands the real world value of these therapies by sharing firsthand experiences, how a drug impacts quality of life, symptom management, treatment stability. That's where patients and advocacy organizations can help CMS recognize that not all alternatives are equal. And so that's participating in the data submission process, and the upcoming patient roundtables is really important.
Wonderful. Couldn't agree more. Any thoughts, questions from the audience? Anybody who maybe participated last year and has some experiences, or who is working to get ready for this year and who can share experiences or lessons learned or resources? While people get ready, I would love from each of you, my panelists. I know you're working with your community very actively, as you all have said, to get ready for March 1st and then for the roundtables in March and April. What are some of the key questions that you're hearing, some of the key concerns from patients and groups that are newer to the process? And what's on people, what is the key concern on people's minds?
I can weigh in really quickly. We've had several coalition participants who are new this year and are sending concerning questions about, I'm a patient organization that says that we're welcome. I don't understand with the survey so that whole kind of confusion as first a patient organization, and then also what does that mean for them in the focus groups and the town halls. I've also had several people saying the first time is, and going, I haven't seen anything. CMS said they're posting something February 2020, where am I supposed to sign up for the town halls? And that's probably strategic on their part. If you think about it, they said that they prefer that. They said this in the National Health Council meeting that was in January. That was an amazing meeting when we were listening to them. And there was two things that I pulled from that I think is relevant to this. They said they prefer that patient organizations and patients ideally, if they had a choice, participate in the focus groups or in the town halls. And so that could be because there was low participation last year. It could be because that might be more robust. There's a two-way dialogue. I don't know, but I know that confusion in messaging and clarity is important. So if you got a survey out and you're also pushing something else, and the patients are probably going to be scared, a lot of them, to do the focus groups, they're going to go to the survey, which then is also hard to navigate, and then you just lost a bunch of participation. So I think it might be strategic on their part. The other thing that I want to remind everybody is, just because there's a March 1st deadline, they did specifically say they will take patient organization and patient voices all the way through, even if they don't participate in the focus groups or in the town halls, because they want all voices. So I want to recommend, don't let the March 1st deadline freak you out. It's important that we get the information in, but it's also important to note there's still time. So I think that's really important to note for everybody.
Karen, we deal directly with patients. And when you talk about patients get very frustrated on what they see of a lack of movement or a lack of anything happening within the federal government. And we deal with a lot of patients on their own health insurance and their claims being denied, or non-medical switching, like we had a long conversation about. And we tell them the same thing: never give up, never give up, never give up, never give up. And so we're trying to train patients that while the wheels of government move very slowly and sometimes seem to never move, that without constant and consistent input, just like the constant management of a diabetes, that nothing's going to happen. So it's never give up, never give up, never give up.
I love that. And Katie, from the American Brain Coalition, I saw that you put some resources in the chat, and I know you all have done a fantastic job working with your community. Do you want to briefly mention what you all are doing and your experiences?
Sure. So we are sharing. Thanks, Karen. Yes, Katie Sale. I just shared the resources as well. So we have unbranded resources so that it's easy for our communities to just add in, change whatever they want. We're just trying to make it as easy as possible for our patient community to do so. And then we're also going to be sharing any comments that are made. And that's why, Erica, I'm glad you just took or you have your video on, because the STAR Coalition is one of our members. And so we'll be sharing that. Also, I think some folks are maybe intimidated by what are they supposed to say, and how can, what parts of the questions should they refer to and whatnot. So I think it'll be great, Erica, once we share yours as well with the ABC membership. That'll be really important.
And Erica, I see you have your hand.
That's what I wanted to say, is that I completed the the call for Austedo, and it took me 4 hours. And the only reason I got through it that quickly was because I already had done a ton of research and had written a couple of articles. And so this is no small thing. This is very complicated, and it took me like 4 hours of just focusing on answering each question. So when I was speaking to Katie, I offered her to send her because I copied everything. I copied all my answers, I copied all the questions, I copied everything, um, and offered to send it to her so that she could share it with her people, so that you could get an idea of what is involved and how you can go about answering those questions, because it's not simple and it's not, straightforward. And I think that our patients, I mean, we're focused on mental health, so we're specifically concerned with the TD and the antipsychotic medicine for people with schizophrenia. There's no way they can answer that. I mean, it's it's you know it's but what you were saying, Tiffany, I was going to ask you, when you said that you work with patients, does that mean that we could actually um, sit there with a patient and go through it and and answer it with them?
Yes. The patient inclusion council was designed specifically around the successes that AR Arthritis, the organization that that I'm the CEO of, we specialize in peer-to-peer education, peer-to-peer recruitment. Like we go like we can teach other organizations the secrets which aren't really secrets. It's just a different way of doing things to get more patients recruited to talk about this, which is there's a very complex step to it, but it involves peer-to-peer and how to engage your community to then recruit others and bring them into the conversation. So all of that is part of what we're doing at the coalition. So I just encourage people to fill out the form, check it out. We're here to help and collaborate.
That is wonderful. I know we're out of time, but what a rich conversation. What I took away is the patient perspectives are tremendously important to really drive home what the value of the therapies is, and to make it clear that things like non-medical switching are not okay, and that these are not widgets that we're talking about. Um, it's a complicated process, but there's a lot of help out there. There are many groups that are standing ready to help and support and share their experiences. And Stuart, I loved your never give up, never give up, never give up. Um, it's important why we're all here. And we will follow up with some resources with the links that were shared today. And we can make connections with anybody, any of the speakers and anybody who was on the call today. I hate to say it, but we're all in this together. And I'm always amazed by seeing how much support and willingness to share and help each other there is in our community. Thank you all so much for your time and for this really rich conversation. Have a great day, everyone.